give us your initial thoughts on last night's committee session.
Well, I thought the fact that Donald Trump spent 3 hours watching television and doing nothing to help turn back the attack on the Capitol was entirely credible. I've seen him in this little room off the Oval Office watching himself on television or watching stories about him on television an awful lot. I think it may be that verifiable that he spent more time watching television during the working day than any other president when he wanted to see stories about himself. And this, to me, is the most important fact of all that the committee has laid out, although we had heard stories about it before, that the President of the United States watched an attack on the Capitol building and did nothing. There are a lot of theories about how this was a complex coup d'etat. I don't think Trump's capable of doing a coup d'etat, but he is capable of watching this group of rioters that he had assembled potentially disrupt the counting of the electoral vote. And it's the inaction, which is, I think, corroborated, and there's no evidence to the contrary, that is the most damning thing that you need to know about Donald Trump, that he sat by and did not perform the duties of president to take care that the law be faithfully executed as the Constitution required.
And this is a man you know well, you work very closely alongside him. What do you think he wanted from January the 6th when he was sitting there not taking action? What was he hoping might happen?
Well, again, I know a lot of people think that there's an enormously intricate, complex plan that he had for 4 years about how he was going to try and steal the election in 2020. That's not how he thinks. He thinks in very short blocks of time. I think what he saw was the potential that the count could be disrupted, that it would not come to a conclusion on January the 6th, and that if he bought more time, he might come up with some other new thing. It was perfectly obvious if he had gotten on the phone and said to whomever at the Pentagon, get the National Guard in there, get whatever we have, send FBI agents, send Secret Service agents, send any law enforcement officers available. And if he had gone out publicly, the instant he saw, the first time the fence around the Capitol, simply a chain-link fence, was breached and the people were moving toward the Capitol, then he went and did a public announcement, went on Twitter and said, I don't want any violence. I want you to back away from the Capitol. I want you to leave the Congress alone to do its job. If he had said that then, the entire attack on the Capitol would have been over then. And he knew that, and he still did nothing.
I'm trying to pin down exactly where his motivations are. It sounds like you don't quite think it was malicious intent, but almost just not caring about what was happening, thinking it broadly played into his project.
Of course it was malicious. Of course it was malicious, but it proceeds in 5-minute blocks. First he goes out in the morning and speaks and riles the crowd up and sends them down toward the Capitol. And then he sees that it's breached, and that's how he's thinking. The idea that it was part of a big plan, comprehensive, well-thought-out, well-oiled, none of January the 6th was comprehensive and well-oiled. That doesn't make it any less malicious or any less despicable. It was simply the way Trump operates, minute to minute.
And thinking about some of that testimony last night, was there anything in there that surprised you, anything that shocked you, any particular things you'd pull out as the major instance from last night?
No, I think the concern of the Secret Service agents guarding the vice president, they could not have known whether the rioters were armed and how dangerous they were, but they had a responsibility to protect the vice president, and I think they were facing, at least in their minds, since they didn't know anything about the rioters, at some point they realized they might have to make a decision about the use of lethal force and to protect the vice president, and that's a very serious judgment, especially against your fellow American citizens. And they were worried for his safety and for theirs because they didn't know whether the demonstrators themselves were armed. I believe the fact is very few were armed, but the Secret Service at that time, at that moment, couldn't possibly know that.
And two linked, if slightly different questions for you. I suppose they are probably linked. What do you think will happen next when it comes to Donald Trump? And secondly, what do you think should happen next?
Well, there's a kind of misconception, even in the United States, about what comes out of these hearings. The Congress has no power or influence over prosecutorial decisions at the Department of Justice. They can make a criminal referral to the department, but so can Mother Teresa. The department makes its own decisions. It's an executive branch function. I've been, frankly, very surprised by the criticism of Democratic members of Congress and people in the media against a Democratic Attorney General and a Democratic-run Department of Justice. I'm an alumnus of the Department of Justice. I know from the Reagan administration, I know how it works, and I'm absolutely certain that they are looking at all kinds of potential ramifications from January 6th. They've begun prosecuting some of the people who illegally entered the Capitol, and I hope we're putting them in jail for a very long period of time through the judicial process. And I'm sure they don't need help from TV shows about January the 6th. If there's evidence that the committee's uncovered that they hadn't seen, I'm sure they'll welcome it. But I'm convinced they're going to take a look at this very carefully. What will happen, and that's what should happen. No one is above the law. That is fundamental to a rule of law constitutional society. Now, whether Trump will be prosecuted is impossible for anyone to say, including people at the Department of Justice. And it's true for the American judicial system as it is for the British judicial system. To bring a charge against the president or anyone, any citizen, they have to have evidence that will permit them to prove with respect to every element of every count, to prove beyond a reasonable doubt for each element that the defendant did, in fact, what they're accused of. That's a heavy burden. We say, among lawyers in the United States, we say proving beyond a reasonable doubt means proving to a 95% certainty. Now, that's not just watching on TV and saying, oh, well, that looks pretty bad. 95% certainty, because I would say the worst outcome that you could get would be if justice proceeded to indict Trump and he was acquitted. Think what the headline "Trump acquitted" means to Donald Trump. You don't think he was enabled and empowered and emboldened enough by beating 2 impeachments? That would put him, in his mind, even more in the catbird seat. So this has got to be considered seriously, soberly, and people need to think about it, and the evidence needs to be there unequivocally.
And it sounds like, as you say, this could go one of two ways if a prosecution is pursued. There are those who say that this should just all be forgotten about. We should move on from it for the sake of allowing America to move on. Is that an assessment you have any sort of sympathy with?
Well, I want to think about it some more. I mean, I remember vividly, as if it were yesterday, the day after Richard Nixon resigned and Gerald Ford granted him a pardon, for which he was roundly criticized. And many people say that really cost Ford his election in his own right to the presidency in 1976. But, I also remember another American president, Abraham Lincoln, who at the time of the Civil War's end gave a speech where he talked about, with malice toward none, with charity toward all, let us bind up the wounds of the nation. This is a very serious, very difficult decision. I think Ford made the right decision in pardoning Nixon. That's not the decision Joe Biden's going to be asked to make, at least initially. It's whether to proceed with the prosecution. But I think many of the national considerations are the same.
Of course, it could be a way to prevent Donald Trump from running for a second term.
Not necessarily. My own view is that Trump isn't going to run anyway because he doesn't want to be known as a loser in history. He'll talk about it incessantly. He may even declare his candidacy, but that's not the same thing as running. And I think the real way to bar Trump from the presidency is to beat him in an election.
John, while we have you here, obviously as a former national security advisor, we have to pick your brains on the conflict in Ukraine. Give us an assessment of where you think things stand at the moment. Is Russia running out of steam? Would that be something you would consider to be the case?
Well, I think there's generally in Europe and America, in many circles, too much of an excess of optimism about that. I think you've got to analyze the situation with utter cold-blooded in mind. And what I'm worried about is that we're in a race now between getting additional weapons to the Ukrainians in the front lines versus Putin taking territory and seizing the initiative in this way. I wrote an article recently talking about Putin's October surprise, which relates to our elections. It would be a very delicate time if he did that. If he said, let's just say tomorrow, I've accomplished Russia's objectives. I'm declaring an immediate halt to all offensive operations. I call on the Ukrainians to negotiate the terms of a ceasefire, and I want sanctions lifted. And he just stops. Who in Europe is going to say, let's keep fighting? Who in Europe is going to say that we want to continue to back the Ukrainians? I think the tactical advantage, I'm worried, the tactical advantage may be with Russia there. And whatever that ceasefire line turns out to be, or whatever his line of control when Putin makes that declaration, I'm afraid if we're not careful, if we don't plan against that possibility, that will be the new boundary of Russia.
You mentioned the elections coming up in the US. Is there a risk of Russian interference in those elections?
I don't have any doubt they will try and interfere in the elections. They've been doing it at least since 2016, I would say. So I can just pat myself on the back here, but I think one of the things that the Trump administration definitely did right was loosening the constraints on offensive American cyber operations. And I think in the 2018 election, after we had made that change, Russian efforts to interfere were substantially reduced. So I hope as we go into our campaign season here now, that the relevant agencies are not only looking out for Russian efforts to interfere in the election, but are taking positive action to defeat and destroy those efforts before they get launched.
And do you have the sense they are? Are they up to the job?
Well, I don't. We are up to the job. What's actually happening, of course, we don't know. But I certainly hope that the snowflakes haven't taken over again in this area. And I think I'm a full proponent of the saying that the best defense, that an offense is a good offense is the best defense.
Just talk me through what you mean by the snowflakes taking over.
The people who are afraid of using offensive cyber operations, which was the outcome of the rules of decision that the Obama administration followed. That's what we changed, that permitted more offensive cyber operations. Obviously, it's all very sensitive, and you can't talk very much about it publicly, but I think the director of the National Security Agency has spoken publicly about how successful it was in 2018, and I hope to see more of it.